When you read a legal document pertaining to an agreement between two parties, typically you'll find language like this. This statement of work, number 1, SOW, is dated today's date, effective date, by and between Awesome Client LLC and Studio MDS LLC, and is executed in accordance with and subject to the terms and conditions of the parties. Today's date, Master Services Agreement, MSA, agreement. Now, at first glance, this might seem like overkill to have additional descriptions like this in parentheses, like MDS, the service provider. But this is in fact the clearest way to describe certain words that are used in the contract so that it's extremely clear that everyone reading it knows the exact words of the language that's used in the entire document. So the entire purpose of definitions in a legal document, or even language for that matter, is for clarity's sake. We have to mutually agree on the definition of a word before we can agree on any concept that word might be used to describe. Therefore, it is also imperative that we define our text styles, font choice, size, weight, style, treatment. All of those things need their own definitions. So as designers, we have the power to assign and define any text style or treatment however we'd like. But one of the worst things that we could do for our typography in our designs is just to mindlessly throw around styles and sizes and treatments without regard for their systematic impact. So let's take a look at style definitions in action. So first of all, we're going to take a look at a very meta example here where I have screenshot. I have taken a screenshot of Figma, the dashboard and the properties panel, and I've just kind of put it in here. We're looking at the particular instances for when these particular text styles will be used. For example, this title right here is the biggest on the screen, and it looks like that is particularly reserved for the project title. So if I change to any of these others, oh wait, that's not actually Figma. If I go back, go to Shift Nudge, and I change to these others, you can see that is kind of the biggest title. Now there is this as well, but they want to show a list of contributors, which I don't have a lot of contributors on these. You can see here's Sam and I on here. You can add a description. So that's kind of like your home base description area. So this particular title it's the biggest one they use on the entire app, and it's reserved for titling this sidebar. Even this one, it's slightly bigger, but this is more like referring to all of the documents inside of it, whereas this is the actual project name. This is kind of more referring to all of these individual things. So back on our actual document here, you can see there's not a lot going on. If I extract all of the sizes and the definitions that are being used here, you end up with these 5 different use cases. Now, this does start to violate the rule of 4, but only by 1. And I think it's okay because, there's a very specific use case for that. This one is 14 here. This one's 13, and that one's 12 right there. So they're all kind of serving a slightly different purpose, and they're titling different sections. So I'm going to let them slide with it there. Okay. And really the way that I did that was just adding these text layers right on top. So if I actually hide this image, you can see I've just typed in all the individual pieces, and I'm just like, okay, that's 11 regular, that's 11 semi-bold. So just a very simple definition right here would be, okay, if there's a section for a team, for example, this is my team MDS, it's going to be 11 point semi-bold. And this is going to be 11 point regular. So that is the definition for that section. And it might be for a team, but it actually might be for the component, because if you look over here on the properties panel, if I hide that, you can see the exact same section kind of definitions being used. So we've got 11 point semi-bold, 11 point regular. So all of these, every one of these text fields, text paths, or whatever you want to call it, every one of these are 11 points. And the ones that are titling a section are semi-bold, and the ones that are, interactive, they are regular. So this is very, very, very minimal. There's not a lot going on here. And it is a design application after all. It's a desktop application, and applications are going to tend to be a little bit more restrained with their text style usage. So if you look back, that is enough to get away with what they need to get away with. Now, if you look at Figma.com, the marketing site, if you're not logged in, you're going to have a lot more variety. Now, if you look at their marketing website, you're going to see a lot more styles and sizes, and there's a lot more variety that you can put into a marketing site. And that's for good reason. They've got these big call outs. They've got, the little kind of combined call out features here with the avatars, lots of different colors, but you're not going to find that inside of an actual application. It would just be too overwhelming to use. So there's, they are defining their text styles on their website. It's just slightly different. So they're using much larger type sizes, but it is very consistent. So it's like every second, every header or H2 tag or whatever that ends up being is going to be that style, that width, and then all of their paragraphs and their calls to action are going to be a certain style, a certain size. So you have a lot more flexibility on websites and marketing material than you do on actual interface design for an application. But again, I just want to point out it's very, very simple. If you're designing apps that are intended for some type of utility, you can scale down your variety, and you can get away with using very simple, very restrained headings. The subtle change between semi-bold and regular, like that's just enough to separate it. So now we're going to take a look at a design system component overview that I designed in conjunction with Super Friendly team a couple years ago. This was called Unity, the design system for the internal ExxonMobil team. And just kind of zooming in here, this large title here, that is going to be reserved for headings that are the main heading, H1s. And then our navigation item, they're going to be this certain size. And then the global header, it's going to be kind of scaled down a little bit. And it's not to say that you can't use these particular sizes anywhere else, but it is saying I am defining this navigation item as 14 point font, and these are going to be 12 point font. This is going to be 32 point font. And the navigation item, even though it might have that particular style and that definition, it's okay to use it somewhere else. We're just not putting it on red background and white copy when it's just supposed to be paragraph copy. But it is very specifically defined. It's not just kind of a haphazard usage of like, oh, let's use 15 points over here and navigation item, oh, it can be 15 or 16, whatever you want to do. It's just, once you've designed something and you've explored some possibilities, then you kind of say, okay, now I can make some clear decisions about what this should actually be. So another example here is on these little kind of gray background headers. We came up with this style they have tons of tables and tons of data that they're dealing with. And we wanted a style that was defined as this is the kind of table header, the editable table header. So we're kind of defining this gray background as the control panel for the header. There's not many other places that we're using that gray background unless it's kind of like a rollover element here. And some of these more generic kind of styles have gray backgrounds, but you can see even here, this gray background here is kind of like the toolbar for that editing and adding section. Just kind of scrolling through here. We are using the gray background in this footer example. So it's just because you define it in one area doesn't mean that it's completely off limits everywhere else. But this particular instance, it wouldn't make sense to have these table headings and other items, this like a big parent group name with the exact same style. So we've got this we've got this gray background, and anytime you can add or edit or filter or sort, it's going to have that background. And so it's kind of defined as a style. And I know that's not necessarily typography in itself, but the background is supporting the typography on top of it. The same way that the light gray button shape and those hard edge, darker gray borders on that button kind of supports the typography inside of it. And we're also saying, okay, any action button is going to have this ExxonMobil blue. And that defines, it's the same exact size for the label, but we're defining it to be an interactive button by the color change versus the label only, which is going to be dark. So just that simple change from dark gray to color can indicate action. And we could have done something other than color. We could have used font weight, and we could have had maybe option 1 could have been dark gray as well, and maybe the sort by was bold, or maybe you tried the other bold and the other regular. And as long as you have some type of definition to differentiate the interactive elements from the non-interactive elements, you're going to, just start thinking about, okay, I'm saying here that blue is an active color. So where else on the components am I going to use that exact same blue for links and other suggested kind of interactive elements, like this big call to action for the search bar. And then for more of a primary action, we have the full blue background with the white reversed out text. So we're defining that color blue as interactive. So we wouldn't want to have a big blue headline somewhere, because we're saying blue means interactive. Now, on the flip side, we do have a big blue header here, but it's not the typeface itself. We're using the color in a slightly different way. So it's a lot of these are rules and we're defining things, but it doesn't mean that it's completely off limits for somewhere else. So for this example, we do have buttons that have this kind of blue gradient, but it's also okay to use that as a background on the header, because we also have interactive elements on this entire big thing. So it's not like we're completely doing the reverse. It's just a slightly different use case. It's like the cousin of the original definition. Another example here in this stepper, if there's like a long wizard kind of stepping form, there's the default style for these buttons. There is the active state that you were actually on. And then there are the inactive kind of to be determined steps that you haven't gotten to yet. So this shows the past, this shows the present, and this shows the future. And you'll notice this is all the same type size, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could technically you could change it more, but you don't often need to, because you can just change the color, or just changing one element oftentimes is plenty of change. For example, step 4 here is bolded, and the 4 here is bolded even though it's reversed out. It's not to say that you have to do exactly this for everything, but it's just pointing out that these subtle changes have an inherent value and meaning when you put it on there. And so in the back of your mind, while you're designing these things, it's helpful to think to yourself, okay, black background means active. So where else might I use black background as active? This 12-point font is more of a label. And where else might I use that exact same style as a label? And you don't have to define these right as you begin designing, but it is helpful just to start taking mental inventory. Once you've designed something, then you can abstract out those choices that you made, and then you can kind of use that as a lens to view your future designs to see if there's any holes in the definitions that you've made, or are there opportunities to apply that or extend it for other designs. And a lot of times you might have to design 4 screens before you get a picture of all of the definitions and the styles for how you want to use it. It's not something that you have to lock in right away. You'll see a lot of times people will try to define 4 or 5 text styles and colors and then use them to design. I find that to be quite restrictive. I like to design and move things around and get this kind of let the definitions kind of expose themselves as I'm moving things around, then take it back out, abstract it a bit, and then I can apply that to new objects in the future, in future screens. Okay, so the next example I want to show you of textile definitions is an app that I worked on for GoDaddy called SmartLine. And if you look here, I've got just a bird's eye view of all of these screens. I actually designed all of this in Framer, but I made a kind of an overview section inside of Figma. So let's just take a look at the onboarding here for a second. And I do want to take a quick opportunity to show you this fun animation that I made inside of InVision Studio. I'm not covering a lot of InVision Studio because I did make an entire course on that called switchtostudio.com. That is free to go check out if you want to really check it out. But I just thought this was fun. They provided these elements for the brand, but I was able to chop them up and use them kind of in an intro animation. But first thing I want to point out here is we're using the good old rule of 4 on our type sizes here. We've got our kind of bold font in a large size. We've got our secondary size here for the subtitle, and we've got our third size as these call to actions, and then we've got our fourth size, which is like this helper text. So these are like right at 16 points. This is right at 14, this helper text. And then the kind of subtitle, I believe that is set at 20 points. And then this one's probably at like 32 or something like that. So if we look back at the onboarding section, I want to point out here that I am using this same subtitle text as a description for all of the onboarding screens. So this has a second line for your business, call, text, voicemail, and more. Well, there's quite a rigorous onboarding process. All of these are the onboarding screens. And so it's pretty important that we have helper text to kind of help the user along. And I tried a lot of different variations here, but I had the initial helper text was just the small 14-point font. But it just felt like it needed more impact. So for this onboarding, I wanted to take that subtitle text and use it as the kind of larger helper text, because this was a kind of an unfamiliar process for a lot of people, and it kind of warranted a little bit larger of a voice, a little bit louder of a voice. Whereas the smaller, like try it free for 1 month, that's more of a quiet voice. And oftentimes like the larger text means louder, visually speaking. So I'm carrying that over, search any US area code, and it's not quite the same size as the titles here. Just want to point that out. And then we're introducing some controls. But now we get into, okay, a small helper text. Like, by the way, this is the number that you chose, but let's get your account set up. It only takes a minute. And then you've got this huge kind of input field that would kind of dynamically size based on their input. But I'm just pointing out the fact that I have defined that particular placement and center alignment and size as the helper text. And so I did try lots and lots of variations, and there were lots of explorations that I'm not showing here. But at the end of the day, I did choose that, and it felt like it made the most sense when we ran this through some user tests and things like that. It was a lot easier for people to understand. So just scrolling through, you can kind of see that now, even once you have everything set up, you have your information to review, and then you have, kind of your dropped off on the last screen before you have to commit to starting your free trial or not. And even after you've started your free trial, this is kind of post paywall, we still need you to do a few more things, like set up your contacts, set up your voicemail, and things like that. So I'm just reusing this style over and over, and it would be very, very odd to use different size text for this one definition. Same with the helper text on the top and the bottom, and these call to actions. Once I've defined those styles, those really just 3 or 4 styles, I'm going to exploit them over and over and over. And it's not because you're lazy and you don't want to design extra things, because when you're designing an application, you want things to be consistent, and not just for consistency's sake. You want it to be consistent because you want it to be predictable for the person who's using it. So if you see the same text over and over, the same size, that's going to be like, okay, this tells me what to do. Okay, this tells me where to press. Someone's going to understand that a little bit more because it is consistent. And it ends up being a Pavlovian type experience. When you hear the bell ring, the dog start to drool and they get ready to eat the food. That's kind of a weird metaphor, but that's honestly what it is. Once you do something over and over, it becomes a little bit more memorable and easy to use and easy to understand. Okay, for homework, we are going to design a little mini, kind of like restaurant menu module here, and we're going to do it in two different content formats, but using the same kind of text style system. So let me just give you a quick demo here. I'm going to hit the F key and I want to go to Dribbleshot HD because I'll just kind of make a module out of this. And what we're going to do is define a title and a subtitle, some body copy, and a call to action, and maybe even a link. All right, so it's not that common where I define these up front. Like I said earlier in the video, I don't often design these up front, but I'm doing it this way just to kind of show my kind of thinking behind it. So I might do, let's say 20 for semi-bold. And we're gonna actually look down below for the information on what you need to include in this. I'm just gonna paste in my description here just so I have a quick little reference. Control-Command-Shift-4 will copy that to your clipboard. That way it's a little bit easier for you to, if you want to do the same thing, feel free. Sometimes it's easier than jumping back and forth. So I'm gonna have a title, a subtitle, and let's go ahead and maybe we'll make this 16. Text, why don't we do 16 as well? Maybe our subtitle is kind of like a grayish color. And then our link, you can actually hit Command-Option-C on your text or your object and hit Command-Option-V to paste the same style. And I'm just gonna go with a blue for the link. And then for a call to action, I might do 14 and go bold because this is gonna be kind of like on a button background. And let's make the button blue and the link white. Whoops, come back over here. All right, view at 100% so we don't get too lost. And I might want to round these corners just a little bit, for fun. So I'm going to do maybe 12 margin on the side. I'll make that a slightly different color so you can see that better. It's not that much better, but I'm going to do 8 on the side and let's say 16. 8 on the top, 16 on the sides. So we'll do -3 right here. And let's bring that in. So there's my button. I know that currently Figma has said on social media that they're planning on adding the automatic expansion, like when you type text, it will change the size, but it's not active just yet, so we're gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way here. Okay, so the last thing I'm gonna do here is go to the Unsplash. Let's go to here, let's go to plugins, and let's browse all plugins, and we're gonna grab this Unsplash plugin. I thought I already had it installed, but that's how you install it. Now we will go to plugins, Unsplash, and we're gonna search for a hamburger. That one looks pretty good. Insert one image. That is a big hamburger. Let's make that a lot smaller. Okay, so I've got all of my little things here. So according to my homework, I'm going to go ahead and go here on right beside text, and I'm going to create a new style. I'm just going to call this title. I'm going to click this one, create a new style, click the plus icon, we'll call it subtitle. Click this one, boom, plus body. Click that, text style plus, and we're gonna call that link. And then for this one, I'm gonna hit Command Option K to change that into a component. If you have not set up your quick keys yet, you can just, let's see, right click and hit Create Component. All right, so now we have all of our stuff. Now we can continue to lay out this stuff, put in put in the copy. Maybe we make a background module and maybe that's white, it's got a drop shadow, whatever you want to do to create kind of a fun little module, and if you want to change this, you can always click here and go to the settings icon and change it to 40 points. That way, if you get ready to duplicate this and you want to do a couple different versions, and now if I want to change that back to like 32 or something, I can do that. And then the other one over here is going to change as well. So I can work with different content and change one or the other, and it's still gonna work out. So if I go to 24, both of them are gonna change. Now again, if you don't want to define your text styles up front, that's totally understandable. I typically don't define them up front. I usually design one thing first, then abstract it into those text styles before duplicating the content. But if you find yourself duplicating things more than once or twice, usually you need to go back, set up some styles, even if they're temporary, because they might change. You're going to be changing these all the time. But the main idea here is that we're going to set up the styles, and we are going to kind of get a feel for, when should we set up a style and when should we maybe experiment a little bit more. So it's not a one-time event, it's definitely a continual process. So even though you've assigned a definition to a particular style, you might find that as other design problems arise, especially in projects where you expand on that you might need to go back and revisit it. So keep in mind that there's scenarios also where you might want to extend the style. So just because you set a definition doesn't mean it's got to be only that. Sometimes your active CTA color that indicates primary action could also be the active state in your tab bar. So it's not mutually exclusive, but it's just something that you really need to keep in mind, is that you're defining interactions by the way that you style your text and the way that you use certain colors. Let's dig into this homework and post your work in progress to Slack if you want to. Post your final pieces into the Slack group, but just get some feedback and let's see what we can come up with, and let's get started.